I want to know how it feels.
Adrian, we need to talk. I'm not interested in marriage. You must secure the empire. Meet your bride, Rose Cruz. You want me to marry a street racer?
Walter in a custom-tailored black suit. Adrian Kingsley looked every bit the ruthless billionaire CEO, his expression unreadable and distant. Across from him stood Rose Carter, dressed in an elegant white gown that felt entirely out of place for a woman whose natural habitat was a mechanic shop and a racing track. She kept her chin high, refusing to let the heavy atmosphere intimidate her. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was brief, mechanical, and devoid of warmth. Hours later, the reality of their arrangement set in as they stepped through the secure double doors of Adrian's luxury penthouse. The sprawling space was immaculate, cold, and quiet. Adrian loosened his silk tie, tossing his jacket onto a leather armchair with a sharp sigh before turning to face his new bride. "We need to get a few things straight right now," Adrian said, his voice dropping into its usual authoritative tone as he walked toward the kitchen to pour himself a drink. Rose crossed her arms, leaning against the marble counter with a defiant look in her dark eyes. "Oh, is that right? Enlighten me, CEO." "I didn't ask for this marriage any more than you did," Adrian said, turning back to face her with a stern expression. "My grandfather forced my hand, and yours did the same. So let us not pretend this is anything other than what it is. A legal contract to save face and secure an empire." Rose scoffed softly, a hint of a sarcastic smile playing on her lips. "Trust me, Ashford, I was not under any illusions. I am only here because my family practically locked the garage doors from the outside. The last thing I want is to play house with some stuck-up corporate boss." "Good," Adrian replied, stepping closer, his tall frame looming with an intimidating presence. "Because we share this roof only because we legally have to. My bedroom is at the far end of the east wing. Your room is down the hall, the first door on the left. You stay in your space, I stay in mine." "Consider it done," Rose snapped back, her patience wearing thin. "I have my own life, my own friends, and my own bike. I am not about to crawl into your bed or bother you." "See that we understand each other, then," Adrian said coldly. "This arrangement has a strict expiration date. 1 year, and then we both walk away clean. No attachments, no feelings, and no complications." "Fine by me," Rose muttered, pushing off the counter and grabbing her small bag. 1 year of dealing with your bad attitude, and then I am out of here. Good night, husband." With that, she turned sharply on her heel and walked down the hallway, finding the first door on the left and stepping inside, locking it firmly behind her. Adrian stood alone in the quiet penthouse, staring down at his glass. It was exactly what he wanted, a clean, emotionless business transaction disguised as a marriage. Yet, as the heavy silence settled around him, a strange, lingering irritation crept into his chest. This woman was unlike anyone he had ever dealt with, and the next 12 months were not going to be as simple as he had planned. The morning sun cast a sharp glare across the polished marble floors of the penthouse. Adrian stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, nursing a black coffee while reviewing market reports on his tablet. The heavy silence of the apartment was soon shattered by the familiar, low, heavy rumble of a high-performance engine echoing from deep within the building. Adrian frowned, his eyes narrowing as the sound grew louder, vibrating straight through the concrete and into the luxury living space. Before he could process what was happening, the private elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open with a soft chime. Rose rolled her custom motorcycle straight out of the car, tires crunching slightly on the pristine flooring before she cut the ignition with a sharp twist of her wrist. She kicked the kickstand down, pulled off her black helmet, and let her long dark hair cascade over her shoulders, flashing a bright, unapologetic grin as she looked around the massive, open-concept room. Adrian dropped his tablet onto the kitchen island, his jaw tightening as he marched across the room. "What in the world do you think you are doing?" Rose unzipped her leather jacket, tossing it over the handle of her bike. "I just came back from an early ride. What does it look like I am doing?" "It looks like you just drove a loud, oil-leaking machine into the middle of my living room," Adrian snapped, his voice rising in disbelief as he stared at the sleek black and red motorcycle sitting less than 10 feet from his designer sofa. "Are you out of your mind?" My bike stays where I can see it, Rose retorted, crossing her arms and matching his glare stride for stride. It is safe, it is out of the way, and it is none of your business. It is my penthouse, Rose, which makes everything inside of it my business. Adrian fired back, stepping closer until he was towering over her. You cannot just bring heavy machinery inside like this. Take it down to the basement garage where it belongs. I am not parking it down there with a bunch of anonymous luxury cars that have never seen a speck of dust. She shot back, her brown eyes flashing with defiance. My bike has character. Besides, your garage is crowded with cars you probably only drive once a month to show off to your business cronies. Those cars cost more than your entire life, Adrian said, his cold composure finally cracking under the sheer frustration of dealing with her stubbornness. And I care why? Rose asked, stepping right up to his chest, refusing to back down an inch. Look, Ashford, you wanted a contract bride, not an obedient pet. I agreed to live under your roof, but I am not changing who I am for your aesthetic. The bike stays upstairs. End of discussion. Adrian stared down at her, dumbfounded by her sheer audacity. No one ever spoke to him like that, let alone looked him in the eye without flinching. The sheer friction between them was palpable, a volatile mix of anger and sharp, undeniable electricity. He opened his mouth to lay down the law, to remind her exactly who paid the bills, but the sight of her standing there, completely unfazed by his wealth or his temper, caught him entirely off guard. Fine, Adrian muttered through clenched teeth, running a hand through his dark hair as he stepped back. Do whatever you want. But if that machine leaks a single drop of oil onto my floors, you are paying for the professional cleaning out of your own pocket. Deal, Rose replied with a smug smirk, turning her back on him to head toward the kitchen. Now, do you have any coffee left, or are you going to keep standing there glaring at my bike all morning? Adrian watched her walk away, a deep, frustrated sigh escaping his lips. She was completely infuriated, infuriatingly stubborn, and entirely unlike any woman he had ever known. As he turned back toward his coffee, a quiet realization settled in the back of his mind. This year was going to test every ounce of patience he possessed. The afternoon sun filtered through the massive glass windows of Adrian Kingsley's corporate office, casting sharp geometric shadows across the minimalist room. Adrian sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing financial statements with his usual detached focus, when the heavy oak door swung open without a knock. Vanessa Sinclair stepped into the room, her high heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She wore a tailored crimson dress that radiated wealth and calculation, her long blonde hair styled to absolute perfection. A seductive, knowing smile played on her lips as she walked right up to the edge of the desk, leaning forward to close the distance between them. Hello, Adrian, Vanessa murmured, letting her hand trace the edge of his desk. It has been far too long. I heard rumors about this little arranged marriage of yours, and I simply had to see for myself if the great Adrian Kingsley has truly been tamed by some street brat. Adrian did not look up immediately. He slowly lowered his pen, leaned back in his leather chair, and met her gaze with chilling indifference. If you are here to gossip about my personal life, Vanessa, you are wasting your time. My private arrangements are none of your concern. Oh, but it is my concern, she purred, walking slowly around the desk to stand right beside his chair, resting a hand softly on his shoulder. We had an understanding, Adrian. We ran in the same circles. You do not marry a nobody, a mechanic who smells like gasoline and cheap leather. Let her play house for a few months until the contract dissolves, but keep your real life where it belongs. With me. Adrian stood up abruptly, stepping away from her touch with a cold scowl. Do not presume to tell me how to manage my life, Vanessa. Whatever we had is in the past, and this marriage, however it started, is my reality now. Leave my office. Vanessa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of calculated anger, before she smoothed her expression and laughed lightly. If you say so, darling. But everyone in this city knows a man like you cannot change his spots. Just remember, when you get tired of playing babysitter, I will be waiting. With that, she turned on her heel and swept out of the office, leaving behind the heavy perfume of an old mistake. Miles away, in a sleek, high-tech office overlooking the city skyline, Damian Cross watched a series of high-resolution digital photographs spread across his desk. The images showed Rose Carter stepping out of a custom motorcycle shop, dressed in her signature black leather jacket, laughing effortlessly with her best friend. Damian leaned back, a dangerous, calculating smirk spreading across his face. So this is the little rebel who managed to capture the legendary Adrian Kingsley's attention, Damian muttered to himself, tapping a finger against the edge of the desk. For years, Kingsley Global Holdings has blocked every move I made in the market. Adrian thinks he is untouchable, hiding behind his wealth and his cold corporate walls. But every fortress has a weak spot. He picked up a photograph of Rose, his eyes narrowing with intent. Damian's lead security consultant stepped forward, folding his hands behind his back. Word is she is completely independent, Mr. Cross. She does not care about high society, and she fights back. She won't be easy to manipulate. Nobody is untouchable, Damian replied smoothly, tossing the photo back onto the stack. If Adrian cares enough about her to keep her locked away in that penthouse, then she is no longer just a stray street racer. She is leverage. Find out every route she takes, every person she trusts, and every place she visits. If Adrian wants to play games with me, I will start by taking away the one thing he didn't even know he cared about. Back at the penthouse, Rose stood in the kitchen, tossing a piece of fruit into the air and catching it as she looked around the quiet, expensive space. She had no idea that shadowy figures were already mapping out her life, nor did she know that Adrian's past was circling back like a storm. All she knew was that living under the same roof as Adrian Kingsley was becoming far more complicated than she had ever bargained for, and the walls she had spent her whole life building were beginning to feel entirely too fragile. The digital clock on the dashboard glowed bright red, reading past midnight, as Rose pushed her motorcycle hard through the quiet industrial district. The hum of the engine was her only company, a familiar comfort that usually cleared her head. Tonight, however, it felt different. The tension of the penthouse, the suffocating expectations of high society, and the lingering shadow of Adrian's world had been weighing on her mind all evening. She took a sharp turn down a poorly lit avenue, looking for a stretch of open road to blow off steam, entirely unaware that two dark luxury sedans had slipped out from a side street and were closing the distance behind her with no lights on. In the rearview mirror, Rose caught the sudden flash of headlights cutting through the dark. She frowned, throttling up to test their pace. The sedans matched her speed instantly, cutting off her lanes, forcing her toward a dead-end perimeter wall near an old shipping yard. Panic spiked in her chest. She swerved hard to the left, trying to find an escape route, but the first car clipped the rear of her bike, sending a violent shudder through the frame. Tires screeched against the asphalt as Rose fought to keep control, but the momentum threw her sideways, sliding her across the rough pavement, while the motorcycle slammed heavily into a concrete barrier. Pain flared up her left arm and sighed as she scrambled backward, pressing her back against the cold concrete wall. The doors of the sedans flew open, and four burly men stepped out, moving toward her with purposeful, menacing strides. Rose clenched her teeth, ignoring the throbbing ache in her shoulder, and reached instinctively for a heavy wrench tucked into her jacket pocket. She was not about to go down without a fight. Before the men could close the final distance, the screech of tires echoed off the warehouse walls. A sleek black sports car tore around the corner at terrifying speed, its high beams blinding the attackers. The car slammed to a halt, spraying gravel across the pavement, and the driver door flung open with explosive force. Adrian Kingsley stepped out into the glare of the headlights, his tailored suit jacket flying open, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The cold, detached billionaire CEO was entirely gone, replaced by a man ready to tear the world apart to protect what was his. Back away from her, Adrian commanded, his voice cutting through the night air like jagged glass, cold and lethal. The lead attacker sneered, glancing back at Adrian with a mocking grin. Well, look who decided to show up. Boss says hello, Kingsley. Just sending a little message about. He didn't get to finish his sentence. Adrian closed the distance in a blur of motion, landing a devastating right hook straight across the man's jaw that sent him crashing hard into the dirt. The remaining 3 men lunged forward all at once, but Adrian fought with a brutal, controlled precision that left them scattered across the asphalt within seconds. He didn't stop until the last man scrambled back toward the sedans, throwing the car into reverse and speeding away into the night, leaving their accomplices behind to crawl after them. The industrial yard fell into a heavy, breathless silence, broken only by the hum of the idling sports car engine. Adrian turned around slowly, his chest heaving, his knuckles bruised and bleeding. His eyes locked instantly onto Rose, who was still sitting against the wall, clutching her arm with a mix of shock and fierce defiance written across her face. In 2 long strides, Adrian was kneeling beside her, his hands hovering over her unsteadily as if he were afraid to touch her too hard. "Are you hurt? Show me. Where did they hit you?" His voice was no longer cold or authoritative. It was laced with a raw, desperate panic that he couldn't hide. "I am fine," Rose muttered, trying to pull away out of stubborn habit, though a wince betrayed the pain in her shoulder. "Just a scrape. How did you even find me?" "Your bike has a GPS tracker for security," Adrian breathed out, running a trembling hand through his dark hair as the adrenaline finally began to recede, leaving behind sheer relief. "When you didn't come back, I checked the feed. When I saw you heading out here." He stopped, his dark eyes searching her face with an intensity that completely disarmed her. The icy walls he had spent a lifetime building around his heart cracked wide open, letting the terrifying truth rush in. He hadn't just tracked a vehicle, he had tracked her. Rose looked up at him, seeing past the billionaire, past the contract, and past the cold exterior she had fought against for days. Slowly, deliberately, she let go of her defensive posture and reached out, her fingers gently brushing against his bruised knuckles. "Thank you, Adrian," she whispered softly, her voice losing its sharp edge. Adrian stared down at her hand on his, then slowly looked up into her eyes. He reached out, gently pulling her up into his arms, holding her close against his chest as if anchoring her against the rest of the world. For the first time since they had signed the papers, the contract didn't matter. The rules were gone. The heavy double doors of the penthouse locked shut behind them, sealing out the cold night air and the lingering terror of the industrial yard. The apartment was completely silent, bathed in the soft glow of city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Adrian set his car keys down on the entryway table with a quiet clatter and turned to look at Rose, who was standing near the center of the living room. Her leather jacket was scuffed, her hair slightly messy from the wind, and a faint bruise was beginning to form along her jawline. "Let me look at that shoulder," Adrian said, his voice low and steady, lacking any of the cold command that had defined their first week together. "I am fine, Adrian," Rose muttered, though she didn't pull away when he stepped close and gently guided her toward the cream-colored sofa. "Sit down." She let out a soft sigh and sat, watching him closely as he knelt before her. His movements were careful, stripped of all the usual corporate arrogance that irritated her so much. He gently checked the fabric over her bruised shoulder, his fingers brushing against her skin with a warmth that sent a sudden, electric shiver straight down her spine. The proximity was intoxicating. Closing the distance they had fought so hard to maintain since the wedding day. "You didn't have to come after me," Rose whispered, her gaze dropping to meet his dark eyes, which were filled with an intensity she had never seen before. "I had to," Adrian replied instantly, his voice dropping to a rough murmur. "When I saw those men cornering you, nothing else mattered. Not the contract, not my grandfather's rules, not the company, just you." Rose's breath hitched. The walls she had built up piece by piece, the protective armor of a street racer who trusted no one, began to crumble under the heavy, genuine weight of his words. For days, they had hidden behind sarcasm, sharp retorts, and a legal document that felt more like a prison than an agreement. But tonight had changed everything. The pretense was gone. "Then stop pretending this is just an arrangement," Rose said softly, reaching out to cup his cheek, her thumb gently tracing the line of his jaw. Adrian didn't hesitate anymore. The restraint he had forced upon himself snapped completely. He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet so that she was standing right against him, looking up into his face. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer as his head lowered, capturing her lips in a kiss that was fierce, urgent, and filled with all the hidden longing they had suppressed since the altar. It wasn't cold or mechanical like the wedding kiss had been. It was raw, consuming, and desperate, a fiery collision of two stubborn souls finally giving in to the inevitable. Rose gasped softly against his mouth, her hands gripping the lapel of his ruined suit jacket before sliding up to tangle in his dark hair, pulling him closer as the last remnants of their defenses melted away. Adrian lifted her effortlessly, and she wrapped her arms and legs around him, burying her face in his neck as he carried her swiftly down the long hallway toward his bedroom. The sterile, empty space of the penthouse vanished into the background, replaced by the warmth of the room and the heavy, racing rhythm of their breathing. When they fell onto the large bed, every rule they had sworn to uphold was shattered into pieces. There were no more separate quarters, no more contractual boundaries, and no more games. As Adrian pulled her against him under the dim lights of the bedroom, kissing away the last traces of fear from the night, they crossed the line from strangers bound by paper into something entirely real, untamed, and deeply alive. The morning light flooded through the glass walls of the master bedroom, casting a warm glow across the sheets. Rose stirred slowly, blinking against the brightness, and felt an unfamiliar weight resting securely around her waist. She looked down to see Adrian's arm draped firmly over her, holding her close against his chest, as if he were afraid she might vanish if he let go. The cold, aloof CEO of Kingsley Global Holdings was completely gone, replaced by a man whose face was softened by sleep and an unmistakable, quiet contentment. Rose gently shifted, trying to untangle herself without waking him, but his grip tightened instantly. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep as his dark eyes fluttered open and locked onto hers. "Morning," Rose replied softly, a slight, hesitant smile touching her lips as she studied his face. Adrian didn't say anything right away. Instead, he reached up, his fingers gently tracing the faint bruise along her jawline where the scuffle had left its mark the night before. His expression hardened just a fraction, a shadow of lingering anger crossing his features before he softened again, leaning in to press a gentle, lingering kiss to her forehead. "How is your shoulder?" "It is fine, Adrian." "Really," Rose said, though she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest at his genuine concern. "You don't need to hover." "I am not hovering. I am being a husband," Adrian replied smoothly, the word rolling off his tongue with a natural ease that shocked them both. That word hung in the air, heavy and loaded with a completely new meaning. Just 24 hours ago, they were two strangers sharing a roof under a strict legal contract designed to keep them light years apart. Now, the boundaries had dissolved completely. Later that morning, the full extent of Adrian's transformation became glaringly obvious. When Rose walked into the kitchen, expecting to grab a quick coffee and head out to her garage, she found a spread of breakfast items laid out on the counter, accompanied by a personal private physician packing up a medical kit by the island. "What is going on here?" Rose asked, raising an eyebrow as she crossed her arms. "You need a proper checkup after last night," Adrian said, walking over from the living room where he had been talking on his phone. "The doctor just confirmed your shoulder is bruised, not fractured, but you need to rest it for a few days." "Rest," Rose scoffed, stepping back. "Adrian, I am a mechanic and a racer. I don't rest just because of a minor scrape. My shop needs me, and my bike needs a few adjustments after." "Your shop can wait," Adrian interrupted, his voice dropping into a firm, unyielding tone that brooked no argument. "And your bike is staying right here where it is safe. Effective immediately, you are taking a leave of absence from street racing." Rose stared at him, her jaw dropping slightly in sheer disbelief. "You cannot be serious. You are telling me what I can and cannot do now. I thought we dropped the boss routine." "This isn't a boss routine, Rose," Adrian said, stepping closer, his dark eyes burning with fierce intensity. "This is me protecting my wife. Last night proved that someone is targeting you to get to me. I will not sit here and pretend you can just walk back out into the open like nothing happened. I can take care of myself, Rose fired back, her pride stinging as she stepped up to him, refusing to cede an inch of ground. I have survived on the streets and the racing tracks long before you ever figured out how to tie a silk tie, Ashford. I don't need a bodyguard, and I certainly don't need a warden. I am not your warden. I am the man who saved your life last night, Adrian retorted, his frustration flaring to match her own, though the underlying terror of losing her still echoed in his voice. Why is it so hard for you to accept that someone cares about what happens to you? That question hung in the air, heavy and sharp, silencing Rose instantly. She looked up into his face, seeing the raw, unshielded sincerity shining through his anger. He wasn't trying to control her out of arrogance or corporate habit. He was terrified. He was fiercely, completely devoted to keeping her safe, putting his entire heart on the line for a woman he had sworn to ignore just a week ago. And that was precisely what terrified Rose the most. She had spent her entire life relying only on herself, building high walls to ensure no one could ever hurt her or let her down. Trusting someone else, letting a man like Adrian Kingsley become her anchor, felt like standing on the edge of a very high cliff. She turned away slowly, walking toward the window to look out over the city skyline, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. It is not that simple, Adrian, she whispered, her voice losing its defensive edge. All my life, I have been the one in control. I fix my own engines, I fight my own battles, and I never depend on anyone. Falling into this, into you, it feels like losing a grip on everything I am. Adrian followed her quietly, stopping just a few inches behind her. He didn't try to force her to turn around or demand an answer. Instead, he reached out, his warm hands resting gently on her shoulders, sliding down to wrap his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. You aren't losing anything, Rose, he murmured softly against her hair, his breath warm against her skin. You are just sharing the weight. You don't have to fight everything alone anymore. Not while I am here. Rose closed her eyes, letting out a long, shaky breath as the last of her stubborn resistance melted away against the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. She still had doubts, and trusting someone completely didn't happen overnight. But as she leaned back into his embrace, she knew she was already falling, and for the first time in her life, she didn't want to catch herself. The bathroom lights felt blindingly bright as Rose stared down at the small plastic stick resting on the marble counter. Two distinct pink lines stared back at her, sharp and undeniable. Her breath hitched in her throat, and her hand trembled slightly as she set it down. For a woman whose entire existence had been defined by roaring engines, high-speed street races, and absolute personal control, this single moment completely upended her world. She was pregnant. A rush of conflicting emotions crashed over her. Fear, disbelief, and a sudden, fierce wave of protectiveness warred inside her chest. She thought of Adrian, of the cold contract they had signed just weeks ago, and of the profound transformation that had melted the walls between them. He had gone from a distant corporate executive to a fiercely devoted husband who held her like she was his entire universe. Knowing how deeply he cared now made the reality of what was growing inside her feel both terrifying and profoundly real. She wondered how he would react, whether it would frighten him or pull them even closer together. Miles away, inside the sterile, glass-walled conference room of his opposing firm, Damian Cross leaned back in his leather chair with a cold, triumphant smile. Spread across the mahogany table in front of him were private medical records, pharmacy receipts, and a detailed surveillance report compiled by his high-priced investigators. It seems our untouchable CEO has a brand new vulnerability, Damian said, tapping a finger against a confidential clinic document. The street racer is pregnant. His lead security consultant crossed his arms, looking down at the files with a calculated expression. Word travels fast through private medical networks, Mr. Cross. If this gets out to the board, or worse, to rival corporate syndicates, Kingsley will be completely distracted. His focus will shift entirely from the market to protecting his wife and his unborn child. Good, Damian replied smoothly, his eyes narrowing with cruel intent. Adrian has blocked every corporate acquisition I have attempted for the past 3 years, hiding behind his wealth and his untouchable image. But a man is never more vulnerable than when he is building a family. We don't need to break into his penthouse to destroy him. We just need to use his new weakness against him. Set up a meeting with Vanessa Sinclair. She has been waiting for an opportunity to sink her claws back into Adrian, and she will make the perfect messenger for this news. Back at the penthouse, Rose finally opened the bathroom door and walked slowly into the quiet living room, holding the small test behind her back as she heard the private elevator chime. Adrian stepped out, loosening his tie as he walked over to her with a warm, tired smile that immediately softened the moment he looked into her eyes. He crossed the room in long strides, pulling her gently against his chest and pressing a tender kiss to the top of her head. "You look pale," he murmured softly, his hands resting securely on her waist. "Is everything all right? Are you still hurting from your shoulder?" Rose looked up into his dark eyes, seeing the genuine, raw devotion shining back at her. She took a deep, steadying breath, knowing that their lives were about to change forever, and that a dangerous storm was quietly brewing outside their doors. She gently placed his hand over her stomach, looking up at him with a mixture of nervousness and fierce love, ready to face whatever came next together. The rain beat hard against the reinforced glass of the corporate tower, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon gray. Adrian sat at the head of the polished boardroom table, his posture rigid and his face carved from cold stone. Across from him sat Damian Cross, flanked by two corporate lawyers, wearing a smug, triumphant grin that grated on Adrian's last nerve. The board members murmured anxiously among themselves, whispering about leaked rumors regarding Adrian's private life and the unexpected medical emergency that had just pulled Rose toward the hospital. "You called this emergency meeting under false pretenses, Cross," Adrian said, his voice dropping into a low, lethal register that made the room fall instantly silent. "If you think you can use my family to leverage a hostile takeover, you have severely miscalculated." Cross chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair and resting his fingers together. "It is not a false pretense, Adrian. Everyone knows your street-racing bride is currently facing complications at St. Jude Memorial Hospital, courtesy of some very unfortunate timing and a little pressure from your past. Your empire is distracted, your stock is dipping, and you are losing your grip. Step down from the board acquisition vote, and maybe I will let your little family drama fade away quietly." Adrian didn't blink. He stood up slowly, towering over the table with a cold, terrifying authority that sucked all the air out of the room. He reached into his suit jacket, pulling down a thick folder of federal subpoenas and insider trading records that he had quietly gathered over the past 48 hours. He dropped the file onto the table right in front of Damian with a sharp thud. "You spent months tracking my wife, Cross, thinking she was my weakness," Adrian said, his eyes burning with controlled fury. "You forgot that protecting her also means destroying anyone who tries to hurt her. Those files represent federal warrants for corporate espionage and market manipulation tied directly to your shell companies. The board has already voted behind closed doors to freeze your assets. You are finished." Damian's smile vanished instantly, his face turning pale as he frantically flipped open the folder. The color drained from his cheeks as he realized the trap had snapped shut. Without another word, Adrian turned his back on the boardroom, grabbing his coat and striding out the double doors toward the private elevator, leaving his enemies completely crushed in his wake. Minutes later, Adrian's car sped through the wet streets, pulling up to the emergency entrance of St. Jude Memorial Hospital with screeching tires. He burst through the automatic sliding doors, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way it never had during a corporate battle. He didn't care about the board, the company, or the money anymore. There was only one thing that mattered in the world. He reached the maternity ward just as a nurse rushed out of a double door, looking up with a hurried expression. "Are you Mr. Kingsley? Your wife is in active labor. It's early, brought on by the stress and the physical shock from earlier events, but she is asking for you." Without a second thought, Adrian pushed past the door into the sterile, brightly lit delivery room. Rose was lying against the hospital bed, her face pale, her dark hair damp with sweat, but her eyes blazed with the same fierce, unyielding determination that had captured his heart from the very first day. "You're late, Ashford," Rose breathed out, a weak, breathless smile touching her lips as she gripped his hand with surprising strength. "I'm right here," Adrian said, dropping down beside the bed, his voice trembling slightly as he pressed his hand against her forehead, brushing the hair away. "I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." The next few hours were a tense, agonizing blur of raw emotion and sheer endurance. Adrian stayed glued to her side, whispering words of fierce encouragement, holding her hand through every contraction, transferring every ounce of his strength into her. The sterile walls of the hospital faded away, leaving only the two of them fighting together against the world. Finally, a sharp, clear cry pierced the quiet room, cutting through the tension like a beam of pure light. The doctor turned around, smiling warmly as he wrapped a tiny, fragile bundle in a soft blanket and handed the newborn directly to Rose's waiting arms. Rose let out a shaky, joyful sob, tears spilling over her lashes as she looked down at the tiny face looking back up at her. She glanced up at Adrian, whose face was completely transformed, open and stripped of every defense, tears shining in his dark eyes as he stared down at his child. Adrian reached out, his hand trembling as he gently touched the baby's tiny hand, then leaned down to press a tender kiss to Rose's lips. They had started with a cold contract, a forced marriage designed to satisfy an empire, but looking at the tiny life resting between them, they knew they had won everything that truly mattered. The afternoon sun spilled across the manicured lawn of the Kingsley estate, washing the sprawling gardens in a warm, golden glow. Inside the spacious, sunlit living room, the heavy marble floors and minimalist decor had long since been softened by the joyful chaos of family life. Toys were scattered near the French doors, and the faint, sweet sound of a toddler's laughter echoed off the high ceilings. Adrian Kingsley sat cross-legged on the plush rug, a complete masterpiece of modern corporate contradiction. The ruthless billionaire CEO who once commanded boardrooms with an icy stare was currently wearing a vibrant pink plastic crown perched precariously on his dark hair, holding a tiny toy teacup in his large hands. Across from him sat their 4-year-old daughter, Chloe, her dark eyes flashing with the exact same fierce independence and stubborn spirit that her mother possessed. "More tea, Daddy," Chloe commanded cheerfully, pushing her cup forward with an authoritative little nod. Adrian chuckled, a warm, rich sound that would have shocked anyone who knew him during his cold, isolated bachelor days. He carefully poured the imaginary tea from an empty pot, nodding with absolute, devoted seriousness. "Of course, Princess. Right away." From the doorway of the kitchen, Rose leaned against the frame, a soft, loving smile playing on her lips. She wore a simple, casual shirt and jeans, her long hair tied back in a loose ponytail, looking every bit the free-spirited mechanic she had always been, yet completely at peace in the life they had built together. She watched as Adrian allowed their daughter to gently rearrange the plastic crown on his head, completely wrapped around the little girl's finger without a single ounce of his former hesitation or pride. Footsteps approached softly from behind, and Adrian looked up, catching Rose's gaze across the room. The quiet, intense connection between them hadn't faded a fraction in all the years since they signed that cold, transactional marriage contract. If anything, the years had only deepened it, turning a forced legal arrangement into an unbreakable bond forged through fire, trust, and unconditional love. Adrian handed the toy cup back to Chloe, gently kissed the top of her head, and stood up, walking across the room to where Rose stood. He didn't say a word immediately. Instead, he wrapped his arms securely around her waist, pulling her close against his chest as he buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "What are you smiling at, CEO?" Rose whispered softly, her hands resting comfortably against the lapels of his casual sweater as she leaned into his embrace. "Just thinking about how badly I wanted out of that wedding contract on day one," Adrian murmured, his voice warm and teasing as he pulled back just enough to look down into her eyes. "And thanking my lucky stars that my grandfather didn't listen to a single word I said." Rose laughed, a bright, genuine sound, reaching up to adjust the ridiculous pink plastic crown still resting on his head. "You were a nightmare to live with, Ashford. Complete arrogant control freak." And you drove a motorcycle into my living room, Adrian countered with a soft grin, his eyes filled with a profound, steady devotion. But I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. Every single argument, every rule, every clash. Rose's expression softened, the playful banter giving way to a quiet, profound tenderness. She reached up, her fingers gently tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the solid, real warmth of a man who had traded his entire world of isolation for a fierce, loyal family life. Across the room, little Chloe held up another plastic toy, shouting for her father to join her tea party again. Adrian smiled, pressing one last lingering kiss to Rose's lips before turning back toward the rug, entirely content, completely transformed, and exactly where he belonged. What started as a cold piece of paper, a forced signature, and a desperate ultimatum turned into something neither of them ever expected to find. In the end, the story of Adrian and Rose teaches us that true love cannot be engineered by boardrooms, contracts, or family legacies. It is forged in the fires of unexpected conflict, tested by betrayal, and built on the courage to let down your walls. Adrian traded his isolated, cynical armor for the warmth of a genuine family, proving that true success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. Rose learned that fierce independence does not mean standing alone, and that letting someone in is not a sign of weakness, but the ultimate strength. They faced scheming rivals, the heavy shadows of the past, and the terrifying vulnerability of the unknown, and through it all, they chose each other every single day. This story reminds us that life's most profound blessings often arrive disguised as our greatest disruptions. It shows us that loyalty and sacrifice are the true anchors of any relationship, and that forgiveness and perseverance can heal even the deepest wounds. No matter how high you build your defenses, or how tightly you try to control your fate, the heart always finds where it truly belongs. As you close the chapter on their journey, ask yourself, what walls are you holding onto, and are you brave enough to let them fall for the person who is truly worth the risk? Because in the end, love isn't about finding someone perfect to match your rules. It's about finding the one person who makes you realize that you don't need rules anymore, just each other.